Ever get that feeling, like when a conversation just kind of goes off the rails?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like maybe it's, I don't know, a disagreement at work, or things get a little tense with family, or even just like a weird misunderstanding with somebody you just met. And suddenly you're just not on the same page anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Happens all the time. It's like you're talking, but you're not really connecting. Super frustrating.
We've all been there, right? But what if there was a way to kind of like shift that dynamic, a way to actually get to the heart of what's going on and avoid those communication breakdowns in the first place?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
So we're really excited about this one. We're going deep on something called nonviolent communication, or NVC for short. And our guide for this whole exploration is Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. That's a
Well, for sure. It's a must read for anyone who wants to seriously level up their communication skills.
Yeah, and it's not just some like touchy-feely thing either. We're talking practical stuff here. I mean, even Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he's a big proponent of NVC. He talks about how important empathy is in the workplace, especially, when you're dealing with all these complex dynamics.
Right. It's about understanding where people are coming from, their needs.
Exactly. And that's really what we're after today.
Mm-hmm.
To pull out those key lessons, the real practical tools from NVC that you can start using like right away to improve your communication, your relationships.
I'm going to show you how to move past all that blame and judgment and tap into what's really going on beneath the surface.
So, are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So NVC has these 4 core components that form the foundation of the whole approach. And understanding these is really the first step in actually applying it in your life.
Okay, so the first one is observation.
Observation. Now, this might sound super basic, but trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye. It's all about noticing what's actually happening, but without adding our own opinions or judgment.
Right, just the facts.
Rosenberg tells this great story in the book about a school principal, and all the staff felt like this guy had a big mouth.
Oh, I've definitely worked with people like that.
Right. But when they actually tried to describe what he was doing specifically, like what behaviors were making them feel that way, they struggled. They couldn't pin it down.
Interesting. So it was more of a label than a description of actual behavior.
Exactly. And think about it. If they had gone to the principal and said, "Hey, we think you have a big mouth," how do you think that would have been received?
Probably not, well, pretty defensive, I'd imagine.
Exactly. But if they had focused on specific behaviors like, "Hey, we've noticed that you tend to interrupt people a lot during meetings," or "You often talk for extended periods of time without giving others a chance to speak," that opens up a whole different kind of conversation, right?
Yeah, it's less accusatory, more focused on observable actions.
Right. And there's this poem by Ruth Biebermeyer that I think illustrates this beautifully. It says, "I've never seen a lazy man. I've seen a man who never ran while I watched him."
That's a good one. It really highlights how we jump to conclusions, how we label people based on limited observations.
And the poem goes on to talk about a stupid kid and a bad cook.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think about how even seemingly neutral labels can color our perception and affect how we interact with others.
Absolutely. So separating observation from evaluation is essential in NVC.
Totally. And the book even has this helpful table contrasting observations with evaluations. Like instead of saying, "You're too generous," which is a judgment, an NVC observation would be, "When I see you give all your lunch money to others, I think you're being too generous." See the difference?
Yeah. The second one focuses on the specific action that leads to the thought. It's less likely to trigger defensiveness.
Okay, so that's observation. The second component of NVC is feelings.
Feelings, the heart of the matter.
It really is. This is all about being able to identify and express how we actually feel in response to a particular observation. And, this is something that a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, feelings can be messy, right?
They can. And we often end up expressing what we think or what we think the other person is doing rather than our true emotions. Like in the book, Rosenberg gives this example of a woman who said to her husband, "I feel like I'm married to a wall."
Ouch. That's gonna hurt.
Right. But is that really a feeling?
Not really. It's more of a metaphor, an expression of dissatisfaction.
Exactly. And Rosenberg points out that if she had said something like, "I feel lonely and disconnected from you," or "I crave more emotional intimacy in our relationship," that would have been a much more direct and effective way of communicating her feelings.
Yeah, that gets to the heart of it. And the book actually provides these lists of feelings, which can be super helpful, especially for people who are like not used to talking about their feelings.
Right, it's like building an emotional vocabulary.
Totally. And it distinguishes between feelings we might experience when our needs are met, like joy, contentment, peace, and feelings we might have when our needs aren't being met, like frustration, anxiety, sadness.
Right. And it's important to note that NVC also distinguishes between actual feelings and what it calls non-feelings.
Non-feelings.
Yeah, so like saying, I feel misunderstood. That's not actually a feeling. It's more of an interpretation of someone else's actions. A feeling in that situation might be, I feel frustrated, or I feel hurt.
Oh, I see. So it's about being precise with our language.
Exactly. And even those vague words like good or bad,
Mhm.
they're not as helpful as more specific feelings like relieved, grateful, disappointed, or angry.
Makes sense. So we've got observation and feelings. What's the third component?
The third one is needs.
Needs.
Yeah, and this is where NVC gets really interesting. It emphasizes that our feelings are directly connected to whether our needs are being met or not.
Our needs, like basic human needs.
Exactly. Things like safety, connection, autonomy, respect, meaning, purpose. These are universal needs that we all share.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. So when our needs are met, we tend to feel positive emotions. And when they're not met, we experience negative emotions.
Exactly. And instead of getting stuck in this cycle of blame and judgment, NVC encourages us to look at those underlying needs, both our own and the needs of others.
So it's less about who's right or wrong and more about understanding what each person needs in that situation.
Exactly. And the book has this great anecdote about farm workers and landowners who were locked in this intense conflict.
Yeah, I remember that one. It was about immigration, right?
Yeah. And instead of expressing what they needed, like maybe safety, security, respect, they were just hurling accusations at each other. Things like, these people are racist, or these people don't respect law and order.
Yeah, they were so focused on attacking each other that they weren't actually communicating their needs.
Right. And Rosenberg also tells this incredibly powerful story about his own mother, who was angry with her father for 36 years.
For 6 years. Wow.
Because she felt he hadn't met her needs. But the thing is, she had never actually told him what those needs were.
Oh, wow. That really makes you think about all the unspoken expectations we carry around, doesn't it?
It does. It really highlights the pain of not expressing our needs directly. And it also ties into this concept of emotional slavery.
Emotional slavery. What's that?
It's this idea that we can feel responsible for other people's feelings, especially if we haven't clearly identified and communicated our own needs. We end up feeling trapped or burdened by their reactions.
Yeah. Okay. I can see how that would lead to a lot of resentment and frustration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And NVC encourages us to move towards emotional liberation.
Emotional liberation. I like the sound of that.
Right. It's about taking responsibility for our own feelings, recognizing that they stem from our own needs without taking on responsibility for the feelings of others.
It's about setting boundaries.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered observation, feelings, and needs. The final component of NVC is requests.
Requests. So this is where we actually ask for what we want.
Yes, but there's an art to it. It's about making clear, concrete requests that are actionable and expressed in positive terms.
Positive terms. So like, instead of saying, don't leave your dirty dishes in the sink, you'd say, would you be willing to put your dishes in the dishwasher?
Exactly. It's about focusing on the action you want to see, not the thing you want to stop.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's also crucial to distinguish between requests and demands.
Because demands are more likely to trigger resistance.
Totally. A demand implies that there will be some kind of punishment or consequence if the other person doesn't comply.
Right. It's more about control than collaboration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the example of Jack and Jane in the book really illustrates this. Jane tells Jack she's tired and doesn't want to go out that evening. Jack responds with, "How typical of you to be so selfish."
Ouch. That's not exactly a recipe for a happy relationship.
Right. He's basically making a demand disguised as a request. He's trying to guilt her into going out.
Whereas if he had responded with empathy, acknowledging her need for rest, it would have been a genuine request, respecting her autonomy.
Exactly. So those are the 4 components of NVC: observation, feelings, needs, and requests. Now, there's one more really important element that runs through all of this.
Empathy.
You got it. Empathy is the glue that holds it all together. It's what allows us to truly connect with others and understand their perspective.
Rosenberg describes empathy as emptying our minds and listening with our whole being.
It's about being fully present, without judgment, without bringing our own agenda or preconceived notions. And there are so many things we do that block empathy without even realizing it.
Like what?
Oh, giving advice, trying to one-up someone's story, educating them on what they should do, consoling them in a way that minimizes their feelings, telling our own related story instead of focusing on theirs, or just shutting down the conversation altogether.
Yeah, we've all been guilty of those at some point.
Right. And even intellectual understanding can block empathy, like when we try to analyze someone's feelings based on our own theories or ideas.
So like we're trying to fix them instead of just listening.
Exactly. And Rosenberg has this great anecdote in the book about a group of mental health professionals, and they were asked to respond to the statement, "I'm feeling very depressed." Well, most of them jumped right into problem-solving mode. They were offering diagnoses, treatment options, all sorts of advice.
But they weren't actually acknowledging the person's feelings.
Exactly. And that's what empathy is all about. Listening for the feelings and needs that are underneath the words, no matter how those words are delivered.
So even if someone says something harsh, like, "You're such a jerk," we can still try to understand what's going on for them.
Absolutely. Maybe they're feeling hurt, betrayed, disrespected. Maybe they have a need for safety or fairness that's not being met.
And one technique that can be really helpful for practicing empathy is paraphrasing.
Oh yeah, paraphrasing is huge.
It's about reflecting back what we've heard to make sure we're understanding correctly and to help the speaker feel heard.
Like, it sounds like you're feeling really angry right now because you feel like your needs for respect and fairness weren't met.
Exactly. But the tone of voice is really important. It has to be genuine, not sarcastic or condescending.
Right, it's not about parroting back their words. It's about conveying that you're really trying to understand their experience.
And how do we know when we've offered enough empathy?
Rosenberg says there's often a noticeable release of tension in the speaker, or a natural pause in their flow of words. It's like they've finally been heard and understood.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when we're in pain ourselves?
That's a great point. It can be really hard to empathize with someone else when we're struggling with our own difficult emotions.
So what do we do in those situations?
Well, it's perfectly okay, even necessary, to take a time out. You can say something like, "I'm really overwhelmed right now, and I need a few minutes to collect myself before I can really listen to what you have to say."
It's about taking care of our own needs first so that we can be more present for others.
Right. And the book has this amazing anecdote about a nurse who was talking to a woman whose husband was in therapy. The wife was really upset and critical of the therapist.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
But instead of getting defensive or trying to explain the therapist's methods, the nurse just listened with empathy. Well, as the wife felt more and more heard, her real feelings and needs started to emerge.
Which were?
It turned out that she was deeply afraid of losing her husband, of him changing in ways that would threaten their relationship.
Wow. So her anger at the therapist was really a mask for her fear and insecurity.
Exactly. And when she was able to express those deeper feelings and needs, the whole dynamic shifted. She was able to have a much more productive conversation with her husband and with the therapist.
That's such a powerful example of how empathy can unlock deeper understanding and lead to more authentic connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we say a lot just by listening empathically, even if we don't say a lot of words.
Like in that story about Rosenberg at the mosque in Palestine.
Yes, that's one of my favorite stories in the book.
Yeah.
He was surrounded by people who were calling him a murderer, and he just listened.
He didn't defend himself.
Nope. He just focused on hearing their pain, their anger, their fear. And as they felt heard and understood, the whole atmosphere changed. They were able to have a real dialogue.
That's incredible. So empathy can even diffuse potentially dangerous situations.
It can. And there's another story in the book about a teacher who was confronted by an angry student. Instead of reacting with fear or anger, she acknowledged the student's feelings and needs, and the situation de-escalated.
Wow. That takes a lot of courage and presence of mind.
It does, but it shows the power of empathy, even in the most challenging circumstances.
And finally, learning to empathize with someone's no is so important for healthy relationships.
It is. It's about respecting their boundaries and understanding their perspective, even if we don't agree with it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to use NVC to communicate with others, but what about our internal dialogue?
Oh, yeah. That's a huge piece of it, too. NVC isn't just about external communication. It's also about how we talk to ourselves.
Makes sense. I mean, we're often our own worst critics, right?
We are. And those self-judgments, those harsh things we say to ourselves, they're often just expressions of our own unmet needs.
Like when we beat ourselves up for making mistakes.
Exactly. And instead of dwelling on that self-blame, NVC encourages us to practice mourning.
Mourning?
It's about acknowledging the need we were trying to meet when we took the action we now regret.
Okay, so it's about understanding the motivation behind our actions, even the ones we wish we hadn't taken.
Exactly. And the book has this funny story about Rosenberg buying a polka-dotted suit.
A polka-dotted suit.
Yeah, and he later realized it was a fashion disaster. But instead of just beating himself up about it, he connected with his underlying need for self-care and also for attending to the needs of others.
Interesting. So he was trying to express his individuality while also looking professional.
Exactly. And that simple shift in perspective allowed him to let go of the self-judgment and move on.
So it's about being kind to ourselves, even when we mess up.
Exactly. And another powerful tool for connecting with ourselves compassionately is transforming have-to statements into choose-to statements.
That sounds intriguing.
So the idea is to first list all the things we feel like we have to do in a given day. Then we consciously acknowledge that we're actually choosing to do them.
Even if it feels like we have no choice.
Yes, because ultimately we always have a choice. Maybe the consequences of not doing those things are unpleasant, but we're still choosing to do them.
Okay, I see. So it's about taking ownership of our choices.
Exactly. And then the final step is to connect with our intention. Why are we choosing to do these things? What need are we trying to meet?
So instead of saying, I have to go to work, we'd say, I choose to go to work because I want to provide for my family. Or I choose to go to work because I value contributing to society.
Exactly. And Rosenberg's own experience with those tedious clinical reports he had to write is a great example of how this simple shift in language can be transformative.
He found a way to connect with his values.
He did. He realized that he was choosing to write those reports because he valued contributing to the field of psychology and helping his clients.
That's awesome. So it's about finding the meaning and purpose in our actions, even the ones that feel like a chore.
Totally. And that can make a huge difference in our motivation and our overall well-being.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Observation, feelings, needs, requests, empathy, self-compassion. What else?
Well, there's one more really important piece that we need to talk about.
Hmm.
Expressing anger fully.
Anger. That seems a bit counterintuitive. Isn't NVC all about being peaceful and nonviolent?
It is, but it also recognizes that anger is a natural human emotion, and it can actually be a valuable source of information.
Okay, I'm listening.
NVC reframes anger as a signal that one or more of our needs are not being met.
So instead of seeing anger as something bad or wrong, we can see it as a message that something's off.
Exactly. And blaming others for our anger is seen as a very superficial expression of that deeper unmet need.
Because it's not really about them. It's about us and what we're needing in that moment.
Right. And Rosenberg really emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between the stimulus and the cause of our feelings.
So the stimulus might be someone cutting us off in traffic, but the cause of our anger is our unmet need for safety or respect.
Exactly. And that's where the four options come in.
The four options. Remind me.
When we hear a difficult message, we can blame ourselves, blame others, sense our own feelings and needs, or try to sense the other person's feelings and needs.
Okay, right. And the most productive option is usually to focus on our own feelings and needs.
Exactly. And the book has this really moving story about a father whose son took the car without permission.
Oh, I remember that one. The dad was furious.
He was. But instead of just reacting with punishment, he took some time to connect with his own feelings and needs.
Like what?
Well, he was feeling scared, worried about his son's safety. He also had a need for respect and responsibility.
And he was able to communicate those needs to his son.
He was. And that led to a much more constructive conversation.
So it's about taking that pause, that moment, to check in with ourselves before we react.
It is. And learning to translate our judgments into needs is key here.
So instead of saying, he's so irresponsible, we'd say, I'm feeling anxious because I need to know that he's safe and that he respects the rules.
Exactly. It takes practice, but it's a really powerful way to shift from blame to understanding.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of how this all fits together. So what's the final piece of the puzzle?
The final piece is appreciation.
Appreciation, like gratitude.
Yes, but NVC makes an important distinction between genuine appreciation and manipulation disguised as praise.
That's interesting. So what's the difference?
Well, true appreciation is heartfelt and authentic. It's about celebrating and fostering connection. Manipulation, on the other hand, often involves offering praise with an ulterior motive, a desire to influence someone's behavior.
Okay, so it's about the intention behind the words.
Exactly. And the book outlines 3 key components of expressing appreciation using NVC.
Which are?
First, we clearly identify the specific actions that the other person has taken that have contributed to our well-being. Second, we connect those actions to the particular need of ours that has been fulfilled. And third, we name the specific pleasurable feeling that has arisen within us.
So instead of saying, you did a great job, we might say, when you stayed late to help me finish that project, it really met my need for support and made me feel so relieved and grateful.
Exactly. It's about being specific and connecting our appreciation to our needs and feelings.
And the book also talks about how difficult it can be for some people to receive appreciation.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. We might feel undeserving, or we might worry about future expectations.
So how can we learn to receive appreciation more gracefully?
Well, the book shares this beautiful story about a man named Nefez who received appreciation with such joy and openness. He really embodied this idea that we all have the capacity to enrich each other's lives.
It's about recognizing that giving and receiving appreciation is a reciprocal act of love and connection.
Exactly. And Rosenberg's son made this really insightful observation about how we often focus on what's wrong or what's missing instead of appreciating what's good and right.
It's like that old saying, we see the glass as half empty instead of half full.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of negativity and unhappiness. So it's important to consciously shift our attention, to appreciate the positive things in our lives, the contributions that others make.
And to express that appreciation to them directly.
Yes. John Powell, the author, shares this really poignant reflection in the book about how he never expressed his appreciation to his father while he was alive, and he deeply regretted it.
That's a powerful reminder to not take our loved ones for granted and to express our gratitude while we still can.
So to wrap it all up, this deep dive into nonviolent communication has given us a really practical framework for building more compassionate and effective communication in all areas of our lives.
It's about moving beyond blame and judgment and connecting with the human needs that drive our behavior.
It's about being mindful of our observations, our feelings, our needs, and our requests.
And it's about practicing empathy, both for ourselves and for others.
We've seen how these principles can be applied to so many different situations, from resolving conflicts and navigating difficult conversations to fostering deeper connections and even expressing our anger in a healthy way.
And ultimately, it's about creating a more peaceful and compassionate world, one interaction at a time.
So we encourage you to start paying attention to your own communication patterns and to experiment with these NVC principles in your daily life.
See what happens when you shift your focus from judging others to understanding their needs.
And notice how it feels to connect with your own needs and express them in a clear and compassionate way.
It's a journey, and it's not always easy, but the rewards are immense.
And if you want to explore NVC further, there are some great resources available online, like the Center for Nonviolent Communication at cnvc.org.
Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep connecting.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.